This is not a fun day to be outside. Let's go in the garage. Alright, welcome back. This is part 2 of the Ford Flex lane keeping retrofit, and thankfully this time we don't need to go into a bunch of backstory that nobody asked for, and we can just get right to it. But first, there's a little problem. If you'll recall, at the end of the last video I mentioned there was a previous design that I had installed and completed and filmed and everything, and that design worked great for one day, and then it didn't work. So like these past 4 years have been an uphill battle of getting the parts to look good, and stay stuck to the glass, and not deform in direct sunlight. I kept making the base plate bigger and bigger, thinking that would increase the amount of surface adhesion to the glass. Well, it turns out that I had so much epoxy over such a large area that the glass couldn't expand and contract with the temperature changes anymore. I drove around on a nice sunny day, it worked beautifully, I parked it in the garage, and the next morning, came out and saw the windshield was cracked. The crack is all around the base plate, just on the inside layer in this nice U shape. It's gotta be temperature related. So, you know, shit. I'm still not entirely sure how this normally attaches to the glass, but apparently this is plenty of surface area. Looking at the pictures on eBay, it appears to be the same adhesive they used on my rain sensor bracket. Whatever it is, it can be squished out the edges, but it's also capable of having very clean lines. If I had to guess, it might be some kind of epoxy-coated pad. It starts off all squishy and pliable, then it cures to be rigid. I mean, that's all speculation. I will replace this windshield eventually, but for now, it's not really ever driven, and I'm not really looking forward to spending the $600 to replace the glass for... I just had this installed 200 miles ago. So much for getting right to it, huh? Now, do you remember back when I said that finding the correct mirror was the second hardest part? Well, now we've come to the first hardest part, removing the factory mirror. Newer Fords use a set screw and they come off really easily. The Flex is not a newer Ford. These spring clip mirrors are the biggest pain in the ass to remove. The very first day of this whole project, back in 2020, I broke my windshield trying to remove the mirror. There are commercial tools available to help you remove it, or you could try the removal tool that I designed and briefly mentioned in part 1. Slide a quarter into the slot, give it a little lubrication, squeeze it into the bottom, and it should wiggle right up. I did cheat a little bit here. I broke the tabs off of this so it comes off easier, but I did test this on an intact mirror. But really, with this new design, the metal button has to be removed as well, so you could just twist the whole thing off in one go. Don't forget to disconnect the mirror wiring first. Just for reference, I'm calling this the mirror button pad. I wanted the final result to look good since, it's my car, but it's hard to see what I'm doing without getting in the way of the camera, so you're gonna have to bear with me. With the mirror and the button removed, the rain sensor cover pops right off. The rain sensor gets disconnected, but the sensor itself can remain in place. Next, the overhead console needs to come out. It pulls straight down from the rear. Let's get these pigtails up into the console area. I'm going to tape them out of the way, because otherwise I'm sure my camera will keep trying to focus on them. Now, before we do anything else, we need to protect the dashboard. The last thing I need is to spill the primer all over the dash and knock a bunch of toothpicks into the defrost vent. Speaking of primer, it's been a full 2 minutes without a tangent, so let's talk about primer. A quick primer on primer, if you will. Now, if you've never used glass primer before, it's pretty much a very thin, fast-drying black paint. It's also kinda toxic and gives off nasty fumes, so I'm gonna wear gloves and glasses while applying it. Seriously, you don't want to be careless and go spilling this stuff all over the place. Damn it. I'm using Sika 207 primer for this attempt. I know Dinitrol 538 is considerably cheaper and available through Amazon Prime. If this were a genuine windshield, I could probably get away with using the Dinitrol. It's easier to work with, but Sika is a slightly darker shade of black and seems to have a stronger bond to the glass. See, the factory Ford glass has a pure black fritting and a deep tint strip that covers the entire frit region. It's beautiful, you can't even see the rain sensor. This works out great because the tint hides everything we're doing and no color matching is needed. On the opposite end of the beauty spectrum, when I bought my Flex, it had Pilkington glass. Besides having a thinner, lighter tint, the Pilkington has this terrible gray frit. You're not color matching anything to this. Seriously, just compare these two side by side. When I had this windshield installed, I requested Ford branded, they ordered Ford branded, but somebody accidentally picked up PGW from the shop, which sucks. Yeah, sure, the ceramic is decently black, but not quite. And worse though, the tint is basically non-existent. Everything I'm doing is visible from the outside. The Dinitrol didn't match up with this well enough for my liking. Sika is better, but not perfect. I mean, it is what it is. I wasn't going to have the shop remove a perfectly good windshield over my unusual need for black fritting. Back in the car, we'll give the glass the first of many cleanings with isopropyl alcohol. So with this vinyl template, the intent was that this line should line up with the bottom of the frit dots. This block should be centered on the mirror button pad, and this curve should line up with this curve, but since we're putting a layer of primer over this whole area, we won't be able to see the dots. That's where the extension comes in, extending beyond where we primer. For now, we'll get it roughly in position, then use a couple pieces of masking tape to mark out the general work area. Let's clean the glass again, because I couldn't resist getting my fingerprints all over it. The manufacturers say to use wool daubers to apply the primer. While that can work, I haven't had a lot of luck primering such a large area in one shot. A single dauber can't hold enough primer, and it dries so fast you end up getting streaks as you go. This stuff is really meant for the edges of the glass where the streaks wouldn't be visible. While I've really only tried it this once, using a foam brush worked pretty well. My technique could have been a little better, but it did work out in the end. You can see this one line was pretty stubborn. A little bit of the foam stayed behind too. Once it's applied, I'll shine a bright light on the inside and check the outside. Even though it looks even, from the outside I'll be able to see if there's anything I missed. While this cures, let's go work on the vinyl over in the other room where there's plenty of fresh air. The purpose of the vinyl is to protect the primer and help us cleanly remove the excess primer. Normally I'd only been using one layer of vinyl, but this time I'm going to try using two. Just to be really daring, I'm going to apply one directly over the other, rather than applying them to the glass separately. This is just standard Oracle 651 vinyl, the kind you'd use in a Cricut machine. If you do it right, you only need a single 12x12 sheet from Michaels. Applying it smooth would be great, but realistically you're not going to see any vinyl besides the very edges. The area where the mounting bracket will be applied, as well as where the rain sensor sits, both need to be cut out. You'll see I forgot to mark out the rain sensor area. This is pretty forgiving compared to my older methods. I probably could have cut out this entire area and it would have been just fine. With the primer fully cured, let's get this tape off and look at the vinyl. You can see the gears slowly turning in my head as I realize I forgot to trim the rain sensor area. Okay, so it's going to be hard to see with the primer applied, but the mirror button pad should still be visible. I didn't do it here, but it would be a good idea to get the template in place, then mark out the bracket region with a Sharpie, just to make sure that I have the bracket area completely exposed. I am really bad at applying vinyl straight for some reason. And like I said, the area between the bracket and the rain sensor probably didn't need to be vinyled. It's already protected by the rain sensor's masking. Cutting it out would have made this portion go faster because I wouldn't be struggling to get these two sides even. Yeah, I made this way harder on myself than it needed to be. In the past, I didn't even use primer. It was vinyl stuck straight to the glass. Imagine just how frustrating it was to apply the vinyl perfectly even, no bubbles, no dust, no fingerprints. So now, with great effort, the nearly impossible task of applying a sticker has been accomplished. Thank you. The extension for the template is needed because we can't really see the dots anymore. The extension should be vertical with the dots. The original mirror button pad should be centered with our bracket, and this curve should also line up. There is also a center line in the model if you have a self-leveling laser, which I left mine at work, of course. Precision matters at this point, so I'm going to jump cut to the template being in place. And there we go. Dots are lined up with the vinyl extension, and at just the right angle, you can make out the mirror button pad being centered. Likewise, this curve looks good, I think. This is the least critical and can be workshopped later. For reference, you can see just how close the template is to the rain sensor. I'm as confident as I'm gonna get with the alignment, so the extension can come off. With a bright enough light, I can see the dots under the vinyl also look good. I need to trim the outside of the template and the trapezoid. The bracket location should not have any vinyl, just primer. I couldn't do it without blocking the camera, so here's a demonstration in the basement. I want to go nice and easy, even pressure, not letting the template move around. The corners are usually what I struggle the most with. With the edges and the trapezoid fully scored, the template can come off. Then, I'll carefully peel off the excess vinyl. The trapezoid can be a little tricky because I don't want to mess up the edges. So now, prepare for tedium. The excess primer needs to be scraped off using flat blades and toothpicks. Steady hands, a lot of patience, and a lot of toothpicks. The flat blade's going to get the bulk of it, while the toothpicks are helpful for the edge work. This is a case where the Dinitrol is a lot easier to clean up than the Cica. It's very slow going, and I was blocking the camera most of the time. The toothpicks have to be replaced frequently. I probably went through 40 of them. There's likely a better tool that can scrape the primer without digging into the vinyl. This is from the older design using Dinitrol. You can see how much easier it scrapes off. Almost too easy. Alright, that took forever. Let's clean the glass and take our first look. The harsh truth that we're going to have to accept is that this will never look factory perfect. I may sound like a robot, but I still have human hands. From up here you can see I've got just a little blemish going on there. But, and yeah, you can see the crack. And it has no idea what to focus on. That's great. We're done with the vinyl template, so now it's time for the bracket template. But not this one. While the primer was curing, I realized I had no way to align the template without my laser, so I quickly added an extension to this bracket as well. It should line up with the same dots we used on the vinyl template. This template is going to slide all the way up the headliner and rest against the metal roof line. Like I said, the extension will line up with the dots, and the center line will be centered on the button pad. And perfect! Let's get a closer look at that alignment. The extension is lined up, both vertically and horizontally. The trapezoid is centered. Everything's lined up. Ah, crap. During the final editing run when I was checking the audio levels, I realized that I never mentioned that when the template is all the way up against the chassis, the bottom of the template should line up with the bottom of the dots. That's my bad, sorry. Now we're coming up to the point of no return. I'll get this bracket nice and cleaned up, and then we can mix up some epoxy. I know the high heat kind in the single plunger tube is more convenient, but it doesn't seem to bond as well. You'll see that I'm not great at applying epoxy either. I'll blame it on that little lip on the inside edge of the bracket. Wow, that's an embarrassing effort. Well, now that I've applied half a gallon of epoxy, back out to the car. So, nice and easy. I'll get it stuck in place using the top edge of the template for the vertical alignment. This epoxy cures slowly, so the bracket needs to be taped in place. It can still be moved around for a good 6 hours from this point, so we're going to let this sit overnight so it can fully cure. After about 8 or 10 hours, once the bracket is stable, I'm going to remove the template so it doesn't become bonded to the glass by mistake. Alright, it's tomorrow already. 2 tomorrows, in fact. You can see I was a bit generous with the epoxy application, but it's not going to affect anything. Put some kind of joke here about hating to burst your bubble or something funnier than that. We'll clean the glass again just for good luck. If the mirror were to fall off, that'd really suck, so I'm going to attach a safety line. I have a length of polyline that I'll feed through this side and tie tight, making sure not to tie around the fragile ribbon cable. Here's the big moment that's honestly kind of underwhelming. I'll start with the camera pointed towards the passenger headlight and twist it clockwise onto the bracket. Let's see that again from another angle. I'll get the polyline up into the headliner and tie it around the plastic support that holds the overhead console in place. Let's get these pigtails for the mirror and the rain sensor back down. So here you can see me using the DuPont pins and the printed adapter from part 1 to give the mirror power and ground. Power is pin 1, ground is pin 4, and there's a third unused wire for the reverse light. Honestly, I'm just going to cut this off and replace it with another JST connector because these DuPont pins were too fragile. For a single one and done install, it's probably fine though. I could always put a matching JST on the factory mirror connector if I ever needed to reattach it for some reason. Next, rain sensor gets reconnected. And finally, CAN bus wiring. Like I said, I'm still using the CAN bus wiring I ran way back in 2020. Twisted pair, A-pillar, CAN bus, imagination. Once the CAN bus wiring is done, the lower cover can be attached. That just slides up and clips on both sides. I don't want to press too hard because I'm kind of worried about cracking the glass more than it already is. The upper cover comes next, and with the button installed, I can connect the wiring. Then I'll struggle to get this jigsaw piece in place. Also struggling because that one red connector kept wanting to stick up right where I could see it. I later learned it's actually easier to have this upper cover roughly in position before attaching the lower cover. It may actually be necessary if I tweak the design any further. Rain sensor cover gets pushed back into place. Same story with the overhead console. Reconnect the wires and we'll clip it back up into the headliner. And look at that, the physical install is complete. Let's get this baby out in the sun and see how she looks. I mean, it's not perfect, but we do need to manage our expectations. Like I said, genuine glass would cover up all of this. This is the same cover and trim we saw back in part 1. The cover is pressing against the glass because the windshield has a slight curve to it. So here's a modified design, including a new camera trim. Let's see how this one looks. Old cover comes off, again being careful not to wrench the mirror too much. It'd be a lot easier to line this up if I could see it from the side, but then you couldn't see. And the upper cover. Alright, now we have this nice gap for airflow since we don't have a windshield heating element. And you know what? In the right lighting, it actually looks somewhat decent. I had this out in direct sunlight for several hours the other day when it was close to 90 degrees out, and the dashboard hit about 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and the mirror held up. And with that, it's time to grab a laptop and get this system functioning. So the first couple times I uploaded part 1, the end of it said that the end of part 2, right here, would be doing the as-builts, but I changed my mind on that. As-builts are going to be part 3, and the end of part 2 right here was going to be acknowledging that I was wrong in part 1, but now I'm redoing part 1 because I've got a new microphone that sounds a lot better than the old one. So I don't know how to end this video now.